No matter what selection the New Orleans Saints have in the 2026 NFL Draft, Arvell Reese, the linebacker out of Ohio State, should be their selection. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we have a full 7th round 2026 mock draft. We're going to dive into the final 3 selections of the draft, which are going to be focused on adding to the trenches, as well as, of course, helping out that special teams unit. The middle of the draft is all going to be focused on getting another playmaker and pass catcher, playmakers on both sides if we can. And we're going to kick everything off with the best player in the NFL draft, who by all accounts should be a New Orleans Saint in 2026, Arvell Reese. We got all that and a little more coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us this time, making it your first listen and being it every day or here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you very much for helping us achieve new heights as we bring you your team every day. The New Orleans Saints with round 1, pick 2 right now when it comes to where they select in the first round of the NFL draft. That can change as quickly as this weekend, with teams going up against one another that could potentially end up having an impact on where the Saints select, even though they are on a bye week this week. But with the number 2 overall selection, if the Saints are truly sitting there by the end of this season, I think Arvell Reese, the linebacker out of Ohio State, should be the selection. 6'4", 243 pounds, has in this 2025 season a combined 55 tackles, including 10 of those for a loss, 6.5 sacks, and a couple of passes defensed as well. He is the best player in this year's NFL draft, period. Ruben Bain Jr., second best. Arvell Reese, first best. Maybe you can call him 1A, 1B if you want to. But for me, Arvell Reese is the guy because of the incredible versatility that he has in his game. He can do everything. He can defend the run. He can rush the passer, as you know, with these 6.5 sacks. He can drop back into coverage with his frame, his speed, his athleticism, and his agility. So he has this scheme versatility that I think would be a very, very good fit. Actually, let me rephrase that. The perfect fit for Brandon Staley's defense. In Brandon Staley's defense, you could line up Arvell Reese opposite Chase Young, let Chase Young pin his ears back and be a full-time pass rusher, while Arvell Reese becomes the hybrid pass rusher on the opposite side that could drop into coverage, that could rush the passer, that could drop into the flats, can do a lot of different things. I've not been a fan so far of the Saints having to drop guys like Carl Granderson and Cam Jordan into coverage. I'm not really a big fan of it with Chase Young either, but it's what the system calls for. You're not going to change that. And so finding players that fit that, where you can move them around, where you could use them as a coverage guy as well as somebody that's rushing the passer, while still maintaining the inside linebacker role for guys like Danny Stutzman, Pete Werner, potentially Demario Davis going into next year. Arvell Reese would be a perfect fit in terms of allowing the strongest bits of what the Saints have right now that fit with Brandon Staley's system to remain, while giving them another boost by putting somebody that is a better fit into a different role. At 6'4", 243 pounds, and a lot of experience in his time over at Ohio State, Arvell Reese or a lot of his time in college football, Arvell Reese is the player that I think the New Orleans Saints should draft if they're drafting him at 2, if they're drafting him at 6, heck, if they're drafting him at 10, even better. If they're at 10, maybe consider trading up. This is the type of player I don't think that trading up should really be, especially not in the first round, in their cards, because they need as many of those draft picks as possible as they move ahead here. But for New Orleans, Arvell Reese should be the target, in my opinion, going into the 2026 NFL draft, especially if they're not drafting number 1 overall and in need of a quarterback. Arvell Reese makes the most sense for them. All right, let's go to round 2 here, pick 34. It's like having a whole other first round pick. It's so funny how people talk about that, right? Having the early second round pick, it's like having a second first round pick. But then if you have the late first round pick, it's like, it's no better than having a second round pick. It's funny how those conversations go. But there's a couple of wide receivers that make sense here. But I'm going to go with the guy that I like a lot, Elijah Surratt, the wide receiver out of Indiana. 6'2", 213 pounds, has 42 receptions for 609 receiving yards and 10 receiving touchdowns here so far this season, working with John Mateer, an outstanding quarterback that will also be available in this year's draft class. We're going quarterback less in this one. We're going in the scenario of Tyler Shough panning out enough for 2026 and going into drafting the most impactful players that I can at each of these positions right now. Now, some of these guys are going to move up in the draft. Some of these guys are going to move down in the draft. The one thing that I do not care about is the idea that that player won't be there. No one knows. No one knows. I say this every year, and every year somebody says, that player won't be there. And then inevitably, they're almost always there. We're not worried about that with this draft. We're looking at impact and what the Saints could potentially get. And really, this is about introducing people to potential prospects and everything as well. So Elijah Surratt, 6'2", 213 pounds, highly productive wide receiver, very physical, plays with a dominating play style. A guy that will go out there and celebrate his 10-yard catch up against in a one-on-one situation just as hard as he'll celebrate that 50-yard touchdown as well. And I love that attitude about him. His contested catch rate's a little bit lower than you'd like at 33% so far this year, but he's shown a propensity throughout his career to be able to get that done. And he's very, very good against man coverage in particular, also very good against run, or very good against zone. But the thing that I like about receivers that are good against man coverage, this is what I liked about Chris Olave coming out, is that they're very good at getting off against press and being able to get those releases, being able to go out there and man up with somebody and win on the line of scrimmage. Elijah Surratt, very, very violent at the line of scrimmage, good hand mover, good hand fighter as well. 2.66 yards per route runs, really good. And so just the opportunity for more production here. The thing that becomes really, really interesting is that if the Saints don't get a contract done with Chris Olave going into this offseason, a draft selection like this effectively says, okay, the Saints are preparing just in case they don't have Chris Olave moving forward, but then would open them up to being able to say, you know what, Elijah is kind of the guy when it comes to being the X receiver, the number one, the split end, the weak side. This is going to maximize your game as a Z receiver, kind of the two that complements Elijah Surratt. The tandem can complement one another in a way that makes Chris Olave even more valuable to the offense and potentially helping to get a contract done. If a contract gets done before the draft, the thing that gets really interesting is what's the level of that contract, and that might tell us what the Saints plan to do going into the offseason. So let's say that Chris Olave accepts a contract that's not necessarily top wide receiver money, but is somewhere in the middle, or the middle as in like the top 15, in the middle of the top 15, that could signal that the Saints plan to go out there and get another wide receiver this offseason. So if the Olave extension gets done this year, it'll give us a pretty good indication of how the Saints plan to address that position moving forward. All right, coming up next, we're looking at adding another big-time pass catcher to this New Orleans Saints offense, because the more playmakers, the better. So let's grab them on both sides of the field. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at PrizePicks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. And of course, whether you're following along with the NFL or the NBA or really anything else, you're going to always be able to find what you're looking for over at PrizePicks. And let me just explain to you a little bit about how it works, because it's super, super simple. All you got to do is pick more or less on two or more players and their PrizePicks projection. So you might see something like Tyler Shough, 175.5 passing yards, for instance. I'm just making that up. But you just choose more or less. You do that for 2, 4, 6 players, however many it is that you want. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and then bang, all you got to do is get those right, and you could be walking away with some cash. So download the PrizePicks app today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That'll get you $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints could add a pass catcher in the first couple of rounds, but they could look to add 2 pass catchers in the 2026 NFL draft. In this scenario, as we're rolling through the 7th round draft pick or draft mock draft, We have 8 total selections here because we're operating with the belief that the Saints will, in this scenario, recoup a 4th-round pick when it comes to the Paulson Adebo signing, where he signed with the New York Giants this past offseason. The only thing that was kind of at risk of cutting that off was whether or not Isaac Yiadom played enough snaps. As of right now, rookie cornerback Quincy Riley has stepped into the role, so we're working with some extra draft picks here. And it's kept Isaac Yiadom off the field, so the Saints, in this scenario, are recouping that 4th-round pick. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility, especially in this little run of selections that we're about to have in the 4th and 5th rounds. And so because of that, and because I'm not trading in this mock, the 3rd round becomes a spot where you could really, with another top 10 selection, another top 75 selection, grab another impact player. And so I wanted to focus on impact coming into this particular selection. There's some edge rushers here that could make sense, but I felt really good with Arvell Reese. There's some offensive linemen that could make sense as well, but I like some of the late offensive linemen in this year's draft. And then I already got Elijah Surratt. There's not really a running back that I'm super fond of in the 3rd round right now. And so with that, I went tight end. I do think that the Saints could and should be in the tight end market coming out of this season. They've got Juwan Johnson under contract for the next little bit. And then there would be, will Foster Morrow be back? What's going to happen with Taysom Hill and his future? Is Moliki Matavao a guy that's going to be around for a while? Same thing with Trayton Welch. Same thing, of course, with Zaire Mitchell-Payton as well. So like the Saints have a lot of tight ends on the roster this year, but none of them, or all but 1 or 2 of them, might be on the roster by the end of next offseason, which is kind of crazy to think about. And so I went with Michael Trigg, the tight end out of Baylor. When we did our 2 kind of dueling 3rd round mocks to wrap up the show the other day, I did a mock with him in there, and there was a lot of positive response to that. 6'4", 240 pounds, a massive pass catching threat. Not massive in terms of size, like 6'4", 240s. That's good for today's NFL, but it's not what used to be the tight ends in the NFL, where they were 6'6", 6'7", 260 pounds because they were all blockers. This guy is not much of a blocker, but he is a heck of a weapon. 40 receptions, 607 yards, as well as 6 touchdowns between him and Elijah Surratt. The Saints adding 16 touchdowns of offense. No, I'm just kidding. But 16 touchdowns of offense here throughout the 2025 college season so far. Good production. He's a physical playmaker. Like I said, he's not a big blocker or anything like that, but he is physical enough at the catch point to make some tough catches. We've already seen that in some of his Baylor tape so far this season. He's a big-time pass-catching threat with really good athleticism, the type of guy that feels like works really, really well in the Kellen Moore offense. And then, look, you could go a different position here. You could go offensive line or trenches. You could go running back. We'll see how kind of these positions develop around this area. But I really, really like Michael Trigg as another one of those pass-catching options, another one of those playmakers for this team to add to its coffers. Let's go ahead and jump to the 3rd round here. So right here, we have this interesting run to where the Saints have, or rather 4th round, where the Saints have 2 4th-round picks, one at 131, one at 138, and then they come back around in the 5th round at pick 141. So within 10-ish selections, the Saints, in this scenario, end up with 3 picks overall. So let's take a look at some of the players they could potentially get here. We'll wrap up the 4th round, and then we'll catch the 5th round here in a little bit. But at safety, I went safety at round 4, pick 131 with Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. The 6'2", 202-pound safety out of Toledo is a versatile player. He has played deep safety. He has played in the box. He's played in the slot. He's played the deep coverage safety, but he's also played the deep safety that crashes down and is a physical player down in the run game as well. Over the course of his career, 196 total tackles, 9 of those for a loss, 1 sack. He's got 4 interceptions and 10 passes defensed over the course of his career as well. And he has a 27.3 forced incompletion percentage so far this season. Really, really good marks, especially in college football where so much breaks wide open deep in college. He's a guy that where he's close, and at 6'2", 202 pounds, he is not a small guy to move off of his spot or to outfight at the catch point. And he's a really pretty solid tackler as well, especially at that size. Somebody that can fend off blocks, that can end up contributing to you on your special teams unit for a little while as well. Kind of the same plan that happened with Jonas Sanker could potentially happen with a guy like Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, to where he ends up starting off on special teams and then contributing over on the defensive side, but then eventually steps into a defensive role. The Saints are going to have to figure out who's that safety next to Jonas Sanker for the future, assuming that Jonas Sanker continues to pan out the way that he has, which there's good signs in terms of all that. But Justin Reed's on a 3-year deal. He's going to be one in already. And that's a veteran player that you're going to be looking at, okay, who's next up after him? And so continuing to invest in the safety position is a position that makes sense to me. I like going to free agency for a cornerback. I really like Reek Woolen and some of these other guys if the Saints feel like they need somebody there, or potentially circling back to Asante Samuel Jr., who could play that star role if Alontae Taylor goes and signs somewhere else. Asante Samuel Jr. signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it's going to be a 1-year deal, could hit the market again next year, and the Saints could really need somebody to fill that role. We'll see. But I really, really like Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, who, again, with that versatility, and even with Jonas Sanker's versatility, they could have a slot safety option in either one of those players. At round 4, pick 138, I really wanted to walk away with a running back here. The running back class this year, not as overwhelming as last year's running back class, which is unfortunate, but I went with Justin Haynes in this one, the running back out of Michigan, 5'11", 210 pounds. So far this season has 121 carries, 857 rushing yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, and is averaging 7.1 yards per attempt as well. Now, that Michigan offensive line has done a lot of work in terms of all that, but Justice Haynes, to me, is one of those guys that can break away a little bit. He's scheme versatile in terms of his ability to be able to run in gap schemes as well as be able to run in zone schemes. That's really big in the NFL. Knowing you have that scheme versatility, it's like having a corner that can play both man and zone coverage. Like in today's NFL, you want that running back that can run in both man and zone, that can run inside and out, especially in a Kellen Moore system, which wants you to be able to do both of those things. 3.77 yards after contact, so does a good job fighting through, picking up some extra yardage and everything. That's big with this New Orleans Saints offensive line, which does not create a lot of yards before contact, so you need your rushers to be able to go out there and pick it up. And I think this helps secure the running back position a bit. Is Kendre Miller going to be back and ready to go in time at the beginning of next season? Probably, but what's the reality for his projection moving forward? How good really is Devin Neal? We'll find out over the course of the next 7 games. How good does Alvin Kamara remain for this team? We'll find out over the course of the next 7 games and in offseason. So I think you need to have some answers ready at running back, and it's a position that's worth continuing to invest in. All right, coming up next, let's take a look at the trenches, because the Saints still have some work to do there as we wrap up our mock draft here on Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Gametime. Believe it or not, the NFL season is almost over in terms of the regular season. And so you don't want to miss out your opportunity to be in the stands with your fellow fans cheering on your team, especially as the Saints, after the bye week, return home to take on the Atlanta Falcons, a game you know you want to be present for, because if rookie quarterback Tyler Shough beats the Atlanta Falcons, that's going to extend the legend even more. And Gametime is here to make sure that you can be there without all the hassle of some of those other ticketing processes and everything like that. You always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and always at the best price, with all fees included. The price you see is the price you pay. I pulled up Gametime, just a couple of taps, found some amazing deals. How about your favorite NFL teams for as little as $100? Download the Gametime app today. Create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode as we take a look at our final 3 selections in this 7-round mock draft. Already our first 2026 7-round mock draft. Can you believe it? And I wanted to focus on kind of shoring up the trenches a little bit here. So I went with a little bit of familiarity in terms of scheme, system, and even a little bit of coach familiarity as well. So let's dive into this here as we continue on. So round 5, pick 141, real opportunity to get somebody that can still contribute on either offense or defense here. We're not yet into the special teams part of the draft, but I like the idea of investing in one of these late guards later on in this draft. Armaj Reed. You've got a couple of other players that are going to be around that are going to be maybe day 3 Reed Adams, sorry. These guys that are a little bit later in the draft, like there will be these players that will be options there. And one of my favorites comes out of Georgia Tech this year. How about Georgia Tech, by the way? Goodness gracious, what a season. The guard there, Keelan Rutledge, is somebody that I really like. 6'4", 330 pounds, perfect NFL size for an interior offensive lineman. He's allowed 3 career sacks and over 2,000 snaps played at right guard. So remember how the Saints really leaned into experience in last year's draft in 2025? They wanted to draft sort of these veteran collegiate players. A lot of guys hovered around 45 to 50 plus games of game appearances and things like that. That's kind of what I leaned into here towards the end of this draft. And snap count was a big part of that too. And so here are a couple things that I like about Rutledge. With him playing at Georgia Tech, that's a very versatile scheme that he's got to run. He is a good zone blocker. He's a good man blocker. And he's a good blocker outside of structure. And I think with the way that Tyler Shough plays, assuming that he's the player for 2026, if not beyond that, which we don't know yet. We'll find out over the course of the last 7 games of the season. But that's the understanding that we're operating under with this particular mock draft and the scenario that we're operating under. Having somebody that is accustomed to moving and looking for work and constantly working and what that motor looks like and looking for the next block and trying to get to the second level, all those things. That's something that I really like in an offensive lineman, particularly for Kellen Moore's scheme and particularly when working with Tyler Shough. And so his scheme versatility, but also he is so used to quarterback mobility playing at Georgia Tech that I feel like that could be a really good fit in terms of the need for what the Saints offense might be looking for. He's also got really excellent true pass rep stats as well. And so when I say true pass rep, I mean true drop back reps, no play action, no sprint outs, no RPOs, none of that stuff. Just a true take the snap, drop back, plant your feet, deliver, right? And he's really, really solid in that area too. So he has both, not just man and zone gap scheme blocking in the run game versatility, but he also performs well, not just out of structure, but in structure. And I think both of those have equal value. We talked about in yesterday's episode how important it is to me, which whatever, but how important it is to me that this team shows over the course of the last 7 games that they can operate in structure, take the snap, drop back, hitch, and get the ball out, right? And so finding their way to do that, or operating in structure in the run game, finding their way to do that is going to be really important. And so I'm going to be really looking at the true pass set true pass set offensive line stats when we get into the offseason to find those guys that operate well within structure and operate well in those true pass rep stats that are going to be the third down, that are going to be you're not running play action on third down. You're not running RPOs on third down. You're dropping back. You're getting the ball out. You're operating on a shotgun, whatever it might be. And so that'll be a big part. So Keelan Rutledge is definitely one of the players that I have on my radar early as a player that could potentially contribute there at some point. Has spent most of his time at right guard, over 2,000 snaps there, but obviously right guard, left guard, you can kind of move players around. All right, let's go with some familiarity here. Round 6, pick 170 in this case. These numbers, by the way, in terms of draft pick numbers and everything, these are not official, right? These change over time and all that other stuff. So just something to keep in mind there. But round 6, pick 170. Cole Brevard is the player that I went with, defensive tackle out of Texas. So for me, this is a late round pick that you're not looking to really contribute right away. That is somebody that could potentially help you on a special teams unit and that could maybe serve a spot role for you or give you some depth. And a big defensive tackle out of Texas that's familiar with Bo Davis and that Bo Davis has already worked with. We've already seen that have an impact in the draft. Now, it happened way earlier than it probably should have in the 3rd round, but we'll learn more about Vernon Broughton when he's able to get back out on the field. But at 6'3", 346 pounds with 47 games of experience and more to come playing over at Texas, feels like a good fit for a guy that could step in as a nose tackle for you. Feels like a good fit for a guy that could hold down an offensive lineman while Brian Brzee jumps over him to block a punt or block a field goal. Feels like a guy you can use in today's NFL where you're trying to eliminate the run game quite a bit. So 49 tackles over the course of his career so far, 9 tackles for a loss, 2.5 sacks. Much like Vernon Broughton has really seen his opportunities tick up now that Vernon Broughton's out and Byron Murphy's out and some of these other defensive tackles that have come out of Texas have left. He's getting more opportunities. I think that him just as this big-bodied guy that can play in the A-gap, which is where he's played 139 snaps already this season, could be pretty intriguing. Has that time with Bo Davis. And also, by the way, has an 8.8% pass rush win rate on 97 pass rush reps, so nearly 100 pass rush reps. So maybe a little bit of untapped potential there, even as a pass rusher, despite his size. So you know you can plug him in as a run stopper. You know you can utilize him on special teams, but maybe, just maybe, he'll have a little bit of extra juice in there as well. So a really interesting prospect and somebody, again, that's familiar with Bo Davis, that Bo Davis is familiar with. We didn't get to see the fruits of that with Vernon Broughton, with him ending up on injured reserve, but he was one of the earliest rookies to get opportunities. So that does mean something, or should mean something. And so we'll see. But Cole Brevard is the guy that I selected there. And then just quickly, round 6, pick 180. I went with Smith Snowden, cornerback out of Utah. Brandon Staley has shown an affinity for Utah DBs. Of course, that was years ago. Utah DBs, not today's Utah DBs. But 5'10", 185 pounds, 32 games played. He's got a long stat sheet here that includes 81 tackles, 3 interceptions, and an interception touchdown. He's allowed 5 touchdowns in his career. Certainly a 47.1% completion percentage, and probably a hopeful special teams player as well in the midst of all of this, and has a ton of experience in the slot at nickel. So I think that that obviously has some value for you as well. Okay, so just to recap all of this as we run through, yeah, I did this by hand. I did it on paper. I'm an old. So I went with linebacker Arvell Reese out of Ohio State with the first selection. Second selection, Elijah Surratt, the wide receiver out of Indiana. Michael Trigg, tight end out of Baylor in the 3rd round. 2 4th-round picks, Emmanuel McNeil Warren, the safety out of Toledo, as well as running back Justin Haynes out of Michigan. And then wrapped up the 5th round, that little selection of that little spot of 3 selections in 10 picks with Keelan Rutledge, the guard out of Georgia Tech, and then Cole Brevard, the defensive tackle out of Texas in the 2nd, 5th round selection there. And then to wrap everything up in the 6th round, Smith Snowden, the cornerback out of Utah. So let me know what you think. I mean, this is early. Like, there's a lot of these players that are going to move around and everything like that. And that's okay. But at least this gives us like a little bit of an early understanding of like, oh, this is what a draft could look like. Here are some players. Keep in mind all of those other things. Real quick, I want to let you know that we will have a Saturday episode this week, even though there's no game on Sunday. Our friends over at Locked On Falcons are having a little bit of a meltdown season, and I really, really wanted to have fun with it, but I didn't want to have fun with it by myself. And so my good friend Doug Mouton is going to be joining the show. Of course, we do the Ultimate New Orleans Sports Show over at WWL Plus every week. So he and I are going to do a show for Saturday here on Locked On Saints, having a little bit of fun, looking around the division, stuff like that. A little bit more lighthearted as opposed to like deep analytic stuff. So if you want like an easy Saturday listen, that will be available to you. So make sure that you come back for that. And that'll do it for our 7-round mock draft episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure that you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.